Okay, I think now it's time. So we start. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kohnwilai Teppunkoonngam, or you can call me just Goy. I'm Program Analyst, Ending Violence Against Women, Safe and Fair Program, UN Women Thailand. I'm your moderator for this side event entitled Ensuring Access to Justice in Response to Violence Against Women and Children under the COVID-19. Before we start, please allow me to give you some of the background and highlight the importance of this event. Since its start, COVID-19 has claimed more than 3 million human lives, and according to United Nations in 2020, the global economy is expected to lose nearly 8.5 trillion US dollars over the next 2 years. Clearly, the COVID-19 has reversed the progress to sustainable development. In addition to this, we had witnessed that the global economy, the global pandemic has affected women, children, and migrants disproportionately. Women and children are higher risk of violence during the pandemic as all countries are locked down. The reports of violence against women and children are spiking globally, from 20% in some countries to the doubling of reports in others. For women migrant workers, during the pandemic, it's very hard to know the exact extent of violence against them. However, from the analysis of the big data from the study entitled COVID-19 and the Violence Against Women, the evidence behind the talk, by UN Women, UNFPA, and the Schuldt AI, supported by the Safe and Fair program, we see the trend that women migrant workers may be at greater risk of violence and discrimination in the time of crisis. For example, in the Singapore and the Philippines, news and media's reports highlight increased abuse faced by the female migrant domestic workers during the pandemic. Additionally, the UNODC reports on trafficking in persons in 2020 reveal that women, migrants, and people without jobs are primarily targets for trafficking in persons, although the true numbers are underreported. And just recently, according to United Nations Network on Migration, more than 1,000 deaths along migration routes have been recorded so far in the 2021 as the regular migration pathways are closed. We can see that COVID-19 adversely affects the criminal justice response to end violence against women, children, as well as to end trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants. In 2020, the UN Secretary General had called for the global ceasefire to end all violence against women and children everywhere, and to put women and children at the center of COVID-19 recovery. Today's side event is organized by the Nitivajra Insitute, Office of Attorney General of Thailand, the Government of Thailand, which aims to promote sharing of knowledge, lessons learned, and good practice across the regions in the spirit of solidarity, as no country is immune from both real pandemics and shadow pandemics of violence against women, children, and migrants. Before we proceed, please allow me to give you a few housekeeping rules. This event will be recorded. Participants can raise questions in the Q&A box, and the organizers or the speakers will respond to them accordingly. For the first speakers, we feel privileged to work with her, Ms. Cheryl Thomas, the founder and the CEO of the Global Rights for Women. Ms. Thomas worked for partners around the world, including UN Women, to promote women's human rights and effective legal reform on violence against women since 1993. In 2008 and again in 2009, Ms. Thomas was selected as one of the experts from around the world to participate in the United Nations Experts Group's meetings on violence against women. In March 2011, she was recognized by the Newsweek magazine as one of 150 women who shake the world. Now we have her to shake the event. Without further ado, may I give the floor to Ms. Cheryl Thomas. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Khoi, and thank you to the government of Thailand and to the Attorney General and to the Institute for inviting me to speak here today. It's my really great honor to be with you all. I'd like to start out just by saying briefly, thank you for that lovely introduction, Khoi, but it's been my privilege really to work over these last almost 30 years around the world in collaboration with nonprofit agencies and government agencies and intergovernmental agencies like the UN to draft and pass new laws on violence against women. Sexual assault and domestic violence, we have learned over these last 30 years, are the most common forms of violence globally. And though the forms of violence against women and girls take many different iterations all over the globe. This is so important here today to discuss women's access to justice, victims and survivors' access to justice during COVID. It is such an important component of ending violence against women. The importance of the justice system simply can't be overstated when it comes to our broad global goal of ending this human rights disaster that we face all over the world. The importance of the justice system, both civil justice system and the criminal justice system, is not only, systems are not only punishment mechanisms and provide remedies to victim survivors, but they are also, the justice system is a prevention mechanism. The message that can only be sent by a criminal justice system is that violence against women and girls will not be tolerated, that there will be sanctions for this violence is a powerful way to prevent that violence, to send the message to the community that in fact our community, our police, our prosecutors, our judges will intervene and disrupt the power imbalance that perpetuates this violence. Laws that we are working on around the world and have been for many years now, most of those laws on domestic violence and sexual assault are relatively new, though they provide so many of the laws that we see from country to country, though new, they do provide a powerful statement about the community's commitment to intervening in the violence and stopping it. And then the step that so many countries we see around the world are taking now is to take that language in the laws that were so carefully drafted and make sure that those protections that are articulated are enforced. So we have seen many challenges, as Khoi has said so beautifully. We've seen many challenges during this last year to victims of violence during COVID. And I'll just name a few that we have encountered in our work around the world. The legal system's opportunity to intervene with immediacy was so seriously undermined with the shutdown. And that's so important in cases of domestic violence and sexual assault, the most common forms of violence. Immediacy is so important to prevent that danger that's right present at the moment, and then to send the message that there will be intervention and we will prevent ongoing violence. It undermined the ability, for example, for police and other justice system professionals to do risk assessments, to figure out what circumstances were present that would indicate to a justice system personnel that this was a case that needed to go right to the top of the priority list for intervention by our state actors. It also undermined our legal system officials' ability to understand the danger, since they could not be present at the scene of assault and doing the kinds of investigations that are so necessary to make sure that the remedies our systems offered were adequate in the goals to keep victims safe and hold offenders accountable. We know that increased isolation has always been a powerful tool that domestic violence offenders use to keep women from accessing safety and justice in domestic violence and sexual assault cases. Now, I say women because we do know from the statistics that we have globally that most victims of violence in the home, certainly, and with sexual assault victims are women. So that isolation that we knew was so dangerous became even more dangerous during the lockdown, as it trapped victims with their longtime abusers in domestic violence cases. It keeps them out of reach, not only from the justice system, but from anyone else that might traditionally have helped them. And we know maybe a colleague at work, maybe a friend, maybe their physician, maybe a family member, maybe someone at their child's daycare, maybe someone at legal aid. Those avenues of access to help and remedies and safety have been so cut off during COVID. We have heard story after story of women locking themselves in the bathroom, trying to call help with the abuser on the other side of the door. So a terrifying, dangerous situation persists all over the world, even still in many places. Isolation, a common tool, also enhances the perpetrator's control over a victim in domestic violence cases in other ways, like economic isolation or economic, I like to say, incarceration, where the control of all the family's money, the credit cards, the bank accounts can be more easily kept with an abuser. And that economic incarceration is as real and can be as deadly and dangerous as being locked away. So I think the one thing I would like to make sure that I say, in addition to the innovations, was that what we know, I think now that we didn't know a year ago or 15 months ago, is that we can't make something work in our justice systems that was already broken before the health crisis. And we know that this is one of the most profound human rights violations of our time that persists around the world. Violence against women and girls is so deep and so broad. We have statistics that 137 women die every day at the hands of partners or family members. That's over 50,000 a year. So even where there are strong laws in place, so many jurisdictions do not have the skill or the will. The actors, the police, the prosecutors, the judges do not have the skills or the will to enforce these laws in the way that they should be. There is little, if any, accountability around the world. Impunity is more often the norm rather than the exception for violence. And our systems are not held accountable. Too often, they are not held accountable for enforcing those laws that our parliaments and our legislatures have passed. Some innovations I want to mention today. There are wonderful creative people all over the world crafting solutions to adapt their systems to better protect women during this isolating period and hold offenders accountable. Messages to perpetrators also are very important. Announcements, for example, like the one we saw in our community here in Minnesota from our chief of police and another colleague in Riga, Latvia, where the chief of police there also went public, went on the media to announce that perpetrators would remain accountable during COVID, that there would arrests of violent assaults would not stop. Sexual assaults would be prosecuted. So that was a clear and important message from the very top, that their systems would continue to hold offenders accountable. Outreach to victims came in lots of creative forms, code words, for examples, in pharmacies that would link victims to services or shelters or to immediate intervention by the legal system. Ensuring that courts were open for violent crimes. If the court system had to shut down, many jurisdictions around the world kept courts open at least for violent crimes, and in cases of violence against women, for civil orders for protection when there were no other civil cases being heard. Now, some of those cases had to go remote, and we did learn from judges around the world that that was a very difficult situation to try to assess all the credibility issues with victims and perpetrators, I should say, that needed to be assessed. But keeping those courts open was so important to do that. So I just want to thank you so much for your time here today. I look forward to any questions that you might have about our work around the world during COVID-19 and the shadow pandemic of violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Thomas. You highlight a very important factors of the effective response to end violence against women, which is the skills and the wills of criminal justice providers, and also ensuring access to justice for women survivors of violence in time of COVID. For the next speakers, we have the honor to have Dr. Lasse Schuldt, the Faculty of Law, Thammasat University. Dr. Schuldt teaches constitutional and administrative law, business crimes, and international criminal law. As lecturer, he held and moderate trainings and seminars on the topics related to protections of children against sexual exploitation, protections of migrants and refugees, business and human rights. Dr. Schuldt has collaborated with international and domestic agencies, including UNHCR, IOM, Thailand Institute of Justice, the Office of Justice, the Court of Justice of Thailand, the Department of Special Investigations of Thailand, the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand, as well as NGOs and human rights defenders in Southeast Asia. Dr. Schuldt, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much, Khun Goy. Thank you for the invitation also to the Nitivajra Insitute, to the Office of the Attorney General of the Government of Thailand. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. I will just share my slides also so that we may have a look together on them. So I have been asked to talk about the perspectives from Germany on the issue of ensuring access to justice in response to violence against women and children under COVID-19. And yeah, I will just jump into it. I think very many important points have already been made now by Cheryl, so I can pick up on some of them. But regarding the German situation, I would just now maybe like to start off with yeah, some mixed findings at the beginning, so to speak. So last year in Germany, in the parliament, and a question to the government asked, well, how is the situation with regard to domestic violence? And in August 2020, the government still responded, well, we do not see any increase of police reports. We even see a decrease in the numbers, which seems to be indicating a certain difficulty of reporting in this time of the pandemic as well. And now more recent numbers of this month of May 2021, which are then the data for last year, showed actually an increase of, in average, 6% increase of police reports on domestic violence as compared to 2019. Obviously, that is an average. In some regions, it's much higher. In some regions, it's lower. But that is the reported average here. Now, regarding the factors, I think Cheryl has already made many important points here. So certainly the situation at home is one that has, particularly in times of lockdowns, has produced elevated stress levels, job-related, job loss, Financial pressure, obviously, a huge pressure regarding childcare, yeah, when the schools are closed, when kindergartens are closed, or other activities do not take place. So this also then contributes to the overall emotional pressure. And then obviously the difficulty of contacting services in a confidential way from home if everyone is always at home. Then that has been particularly difficult. So that fewer monitoring and also fewer external support in terms of advisory and counseling, because some of these services had to be more limited during the time of severe lockdowns or also during generally the pandemic. Nonetheless, these services kept running, but in a reduced capacity, and we will see some innovations that may have been taken on this way. Now, just maybe as a background, I think Cheryl has already mentioned, so regarding the legal perspective, we have administrative responses, we have civil and criminal responses to domestic violence. So I just put them here on the slide just to have an overview of what are these measures of prevention and repression. But I totally agree with Cheryl as well that prevention should have a certain emphasis here, just to make sure that these incidents are not taking place or are even prevented, and repression is then the final intervention. So some elements that you see here, so in cases where police reports or where police gets a knowledge of incidents of domestic violence, then an immediate expulsion of the perpetrator is always possible. That is first of all temporary, that is based on administrative law, that needs to be confirmed by the responsible authority. That then can also have additional restraining orders if necessary. Restraining orders such as not entering the vicinity of the apartment where the place where the victim lives, or the workplace or the school of the children, or similar places. However, also this is then still temporary based on this administrative law response. Then early on, advisory services must be involved in the German system here. So public welfare services, youth welfare services, but also other advice, for example, if there are issues regarding immigration questions, or a drug addiction plays a role, or similar issues. Everything should be already at an early point also be advised by the police itself which services there are, so that the victim is aware of that. And then obviously civil remedies are, you may say, the more permanent remedy here, where then actually the apartment where the couple or where the family lived together, that apartment can be allocated to the victim, and the perpetrator would be expelled here, and that can be up to 6 months, and can be even then prolonged for another 6 months. Additional protection orders, such as the ones that we have just mentioned, so restraining orders here, and then obviously issues of compensation, child custody, will always be dealt with in the civil court. And then criminal prosecution is obviously then also an important element as well. Now, during the pandemic, these services in Germany have largely continued to operate. However, as Cheryl also mentioned, sometimes in a remote way, sometimes also in not such an immediate way, because of a certain shortage here of the capacities. And that was certainly a big problem, because in these issues, immediacy is really the key. Now, nonetheless, let's have a look maybe at some of the innovations that have taken place or that are taking place. So as one of the big problems is the fact that family or partnerships exist then together on very small space. It is very difficult for victims to make confidential calls to the police or to other services, so that currently the federal government of Germany funds the development of an incognito smartphone app, which is then somewhat hidden on the smartphone, and that even enables the gathering of evidence by the victim itself in this app, which is then also ready to be used in courts. So this is really then recognized also in the justice system. so that the problem of gathering evidence, which is the big problem in these cases, because there are no other witnesses here in the four walls, that problem is remedied to a certain extent. This is currently developed. Other innovations, because of the shortage of some services, have been then mobile counseling, where counselors went out and met the people at their doorstep, and ringed at doors where they were maybe suspicious of certain developments. So-called walk and talk advisory has been offered, because if you cannot meet inside, then you may take a walk in the park, for example. Integrated counseling, one-stop shops where you would not need to go to every service separately, but then immigration, health issues, school, all kinds of advice that you may need regarding these situations are then provided at one stop, which is also cutting down the necessity for further meetings, and then also closer cooperation here between municipal agencies. Now, one final point I would like to particularly mention here is that Europe is, as you know, a place where we see very high levels of migration over the last, 10 to 20 years, but obviously over the last 5 years in particular. And in this regard, violence against women and children is also a particular problem. Now, with regard to this issue of migration towards Europe and how to then make sure that among asylum seekers, for example, in asylum accommodation centers, violence can be prevented, also some important steps I think have been taken. So on the level of the EU, a software tool has been developed for identification of persons with special needs. That includes obviously women and children, but also obviously all other categories of persons with special needs, so that officers of the EU or also of national services are aware of what can be done in order to make sure from an early point that these persons receive a particular treatment during the procedure. So this is very informative also for persons who do not have any specific psychological or medical knowledge. It helps quite a lot. Then minimum standards now within Germany have been developed for the protection of asylum seekers in accommodation centers. For example, plans have to be developed, internal, external structures have been or have to be brought into a certain systematic way. And I think these standards have indeed made sure that certain checklists have to just be made checked, and therefore can be contributing to a better situation in these centers. All right, the final points that you see on the list are also then included here, but I have received a sign that I'm already out of time. So therefore, I would like to thank you very much for the invitation and for the attention, and I look forward to maybe some more discussion afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lasse Schuldt. The next speakers, we won't be able to have this event without her. Ms. Santanee Ditsayabut, expert public prosecutor, Director of Secretariat Office of Nitivajra Insitute, Office of Attorney General of Thailand. Ms. Santanee has served as public prosecutor and advocated on ending violence against women and children for 2 decades. In 2013, she shared an informal consultation for the draft resolution on the UN model strategies and practical measures on eliminations of violence against children in the field of crime prevention and criminal justice at the 22nd CCPCJ in Vienna. She also shared the informal consultation on the femicide at the 23rd CCPCJ. Ms. Santanee was appointed by the Prime Minister of Thailand in 2015 as one of the special committee members to improve the criminal justice procedures for trafficking in person. And she made a major contributions in drafting the Human Trafficking Criminal Procedure Act of Thailand. I'm so pleased to pass the floor to Ms. Santanee Ditsayabut.
Thank you very much, Kohnwilai. It is an honor for me and Nitivajra Insitute to take part in this side event on the very important topic, as we all need justice, and not only knowing that justice is out there, but we need to be able to reach out for it whenever we want, especially in the time of the crisis as like COVID-19 pandemic. Access to justice is not the matter on only for the justice system or law enforcement, but it's a fundamental right in itself and also a prerequisite to the protection of all human rights, as I quoted from one of the United Nations report. It is also a part of the rule of law and sustainable development. As you can see that access to justice, the Sustainable Development Goal has put access to justice in Goal 16 alongside with the Goal 5 of the gender equality. When we talk about the access to justice and violence against women and children, let me bring your attention to the United Nations standards and norms. In this area, we call it the United Nations Model Strategies and Practical Measures for the Elimination of Violence Against Children in the field of crime prevention and criminal justice, and also the updated model strategies on the same topic for women. These two documents, Thailand put our best effort in the drafting process and its implementation. And in the slide, you can see that the latest release of the translation from English to Thai version for our better implementation in Thailand. These two documents spell out a strategic and comprehensive, well-thought approach on the eradication of violence against women and children. It also recognizes the need of special groups, including migrant and stateless persons, need to access to all services and legal remedies that the state provided. And the migrant is also the thematic discussion of our CCPCJ this year. As you see from Cheryl, Ms. Cheryl and Dr. Lasse, that over the last 1.5 years of the pandemic, it increased the risk of violence to women and children, especially the domestic violence. It's because the pandemic amplified the financial stress, and also another factor is alcohol consumption, which is both the triggers of the violence, and especially domestic violence. And I can introduce you that Thailand has also the law on domestic violence. We call the Domestic Violence Victim Protection Act 2007. As we don't have much time, I couldn't walk you through all the provision of this law, but I can tell you that the real challenge is how to implement the law effectively. As Ms. Cheryl said, that domestic violence is a common form but under-reported form of violence and always seen as a private matter. In Thailand, the male dominant attitude is still pervasive in the society. There is a commonly known phrase that men are the front legs of an elephant and women are the hind legs, follow men's front legs. This phrase, it shows the problem of structural inequalities of power that has been deeply cultivated in the Thai society. Man is always referred to as a leader of the families, and all these beliefs make a man feel that he can do everything, including hold power over their partner in exerting his dominance. And I have some type of statistic to show you. Considering the information reviewed by the survey of over 1,600 women, the female respond that they think wife and girlfriend must obey and pay attention to their partners. So this kind of stigmatization leads to the challenge for female victims to report violence to the police. Actually, this seems to be a simple stage, but it's very difficult to the person who always frightened for a long time from domestic violence and who also question whether the criminal justice can help their life to live better. Oftentimes, domestic violence is, when it happens, the person who be informed is not the person in the family. I would like to tell you about one case that I handled 2 years ago. It's about sexual and domestic violence. A pretty girl was raped several times over the years by her biological fathers. Actually, this girl is very activist and she was taking part in many activities of school. But one day her teacher saw she looks kind of depressed and she consoled her and she told about the incident that the latest one is just happened yesterday. And the teacher found that actually the girl already told her aunt for a long time, but her aunt couldn't help anything, just told the girl that next time when the incident happens, she should fight harder in order to have the physical injury serious enough to be the evidence to report to the police, and the police can believe her. So she also suffered from her relative that nobody believed her and accused her of bringing trouble to the families. The thing is, during that time, she's been able to go to school, went to school and told the teacher. But however, can you imagine if that happened around this time of pandemic, what will happen to her? She cannot go to school. She has to be in the house, and due to the decreased access of the physical support service during the lockdown period, maybe she will live with an even more vulnerable situation. This case made me learn that to be able to deal with domestic violence, you need to work in a multidisciplinary approach as recommended by the model strategy, that complementary role of the criminal justice system, private sector, support service, health and education need to be recognized. I recall during that time, I had to work with a social worker at the shelter to provide a safe place for the girl during the prosecution against her own father, and also I have to work with the psychologist and the police to make sure that she wasn't being re-victimized over the process of the criminal justice. And also later on, I have to work with the private sector to provide the place that she can practice the, at that time, I remember she wants to be the caretaker of the bedbound patient because based on her experience in taking care of her grandmother. And because she has no family to turn to anymore after the case, so we find a place that she can stay, practice and earn money afterward. So if you imagine during the pandemic, all these things may be very difficult to happen because of the logistical issues of the distancing measures that reduce the support service and also the legal service. So I have only 2 minutes, so maybe let me humbly suggest how to cope with the problem from my perspective. First, I think we need to explore the legislative development. As domestic violence law, we have to explore the new way to adjudicate the case. There's a concern that no sufficient system in place for receiving and addressing report. And one thing that I can see that is the challenge that frustrates the access to justice is the statute of limitation. In Thailand, domestic violence offense is a compoundable offense, which the victim has to report the crime to the police within 3 months. And you see, during this time of difficulties, how can she report to the police within 3 months? And also, we need a lot of time that the victim has courage enough to gather evidence and also gather her thought and decide to go to seek justice from the criminal justice. So this is the things that we need to think about. Second is the training for criminal justice officer on law and attitude. I think Ms. Cheryl already mentioned earlier that we need a training, not only the law, because how to implement it is very difficult. The attitude on misunderstanding about the way the victim think and do is also important. And if you can change the mindset, you can change everything. And how can you change the mindset? you have to go with the data. You have to have the data to prove, for example, research and experience that suggests that victims do not generally report their initial intimate sexual victimization, but typically they will suffer multiple assault before reporting the police. And lastly, I think the same with Professor Lasse that we need to think about innovative justice system using all of the modern technologies. And let me end by saying that while the COVID-19 may be a great threat to women and children experiencing domestic violence, it also the opportunity for us to think about innovative policy response that will be helping us in the long run. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the future coming faster than we think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Santanee Ditsayabut. Ms. Santanee has highlighted the important factor of the success by increasing the international cooperations and multi-agencies cooperations for the integrated service. Now, last but totally not least, we have Mr. Derek Johnstone, UK Vice-Consul in Thailand, as the final speaker. Before joining the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office as Vice-Consul at the British Embassy Bangkok, Mr. Johnstone was a police officer in the UK for 30 years. Now, as the UK's Vice-Consul, he leads a team of consular officers to respond to child abuse, sexual assault, and the domestic violence. Additionally, he runs training in those areas for Thai authorities, police officers, tourist assistant officers, NGOs, international schools, and other agencies. The trainings not only aim at capacity building, but also awareness raising of how to reduce the risk of secondary trauma and the primary prevention of sexual violence, as highlight the UK-based practice on child safeguarding issues. Mr. Johnstone, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invite. I'm very honoured to be speaking here. 10 minutes, so I'll get straight on. Thank you very much for the introduction. So I don't need to go into that. Quickly going to go through the role of the British Embassy and what we do in dealing with cases and building capacity for the Thai authorities. Then going to talk a little bit about intimate partner violence and effect on children, which is quite often overlooked, particularly in these pandemic times. COVID-19 and the impact on survivors, a lot of which has already been covered, so I'll briefly touch on that. And the responses to intimate partner violence. I'll give a little bit of perspective as how we deal with it in the UK and my experience of how we deal with it for foreign nationals in Thailand, but also how the Thai authorities deal with intimate partner violence and violence against women and children in particular. Just quickly going through our remit, which is under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. So this gives a framework for consular relations within foreign nations, and it's ratified by 180 states, including Thailand and the UK. So this gives our authority to work in foreign countries to support British nationals. But what I say for the British Embassy goes for all nationalities. So the American Embassy, the Australians, all embassies have a consular section, and their role is to assist their foreign nationals in distress. So quickly, the British Embassy, our section has probably about 1,500 cases every year. We're one of the busiest consular sections in the world. So, because on an average year, we have 1 million tourists plus about 60,000 British residents, and that brings with it all types of cases, including rape and sexual assault, domestic violence, child protection cases, as well as hospitalizations and deaths, etc. So that's the role that we perform in Thailand. We cover all of Thailand from our embassy in Bangkok. Some of the work that we do for the Thai authorities in relation to capacity building. So over the last few years, we've run training for social workers, NGOs, and university academics in social work best practice. We've worked with various organizations in Chiang Mai, getting them to agree a set of protocols on handling rape and sexual assault. So we've managed to, in Chiang Mai, we've managed to get the police, the tourist assistance center officers, hospital social workers together to agree a standard operating procedure where if they have a survivor of rape or sexual assault, the first place to take them is the hospital. Whereas in the past, they would take them to the police station, they'd be questioned on numerous times. So following on from that, we managed to train hundreds of police and tourist assistance officers in rape and sexual assault first responder training. So that relates also to domestic assault as well, and has a knock-on effect for child safeguarding, child protection cases as well. Currently, I'm involved in a study at University of Central Lancashire on victim blaming and first responders in Thailand. That'll be published sometime during the summer, and it's quite an eye-opening experience, having interviewed a lot of first responders, and to find the level of victim blaming that goes on both in sexual violence but also in domestic violence as well. And that's not only you have this perception of a male police officer who blames victims and doesn't take a report, tries to divert the survivor away from justice. It was actually very difficult to get male officers involved in the study. So 95% of the study involved female officers, female tourist assistance officers, NGOs. So even within female officers in Thailand, there's a huge amount of victim blaming within the female officers. So if we actually got access to male officers, I'd imagine that would be a lot worse. So the study really showed that if first responders are given the right training which involves looking at social norms, the influence of religion on victim blaming, the influence of media, being trauma informed. So that training can make a difference, can have an impact on the level of victim blaming that goes on. So that'll be an interesting study. I look forward to that being published sometime in the summer. Quickly going through, we look at sexual violence awareness training. I've delivered training to school teachers, and also we collaborate with schools on child safeguarding. I ran a series of webinars to all 170 international schools a couple of months ago. So that's some of the capacity building that we're doing. We're not just looking at British nationals and dealing with cases. We're also trying to improve things here in Thailand and make a difference. Quickly looking at intimate partner violence, a quick definition. We're all very knowledgeable here, but basically I prefer the intimate partner violence as opposed to domestic violence, because we're looking at intimate relationships, physical, sexual, psychological harms, etc. And what's not often considered when we're looking at intimate partner violence is the effects of children and the exposure of children to intimate partner violence. And intimate partner violence in childhood, exposure to that is child abuse, and it's something that at the embassy, when we have a domestic violence case, and we've seen an increase lately, particularly with the COVID pandemic, we always look at the child protection aspect as well. So quickly going through this, we can have exposure either directly or indirectly, and a few of the circumstances here that would make a child sort of indirectly exposed. So hearing the abuse from another room, seeing the parents' injuries, etc. Now, an interesting statistic that came out of research that was done in the UK quite recently, that when we've got intimate partner violence, very often we've got children being harmed. So we've got physical child abuse that's running hand in hand with intimate partner violence. And some of the effects there are sort of wide-reaching on children. Some of the effects, that self-blame, that children are blaming themselves, the difficulties at school, etc., and behavioural problems. So all of this in COVID times, when the children are not at school, they're confined with both parents. The parents are not going to work. Perhaps they've lost their jobs or they're working remotely. So all of these things together, and it creates a perfect storm really for survivors of intimate partner violence. And the victims are also the children. The victims aren't just the mothers, the children as well. And that's something we have to bear in mind, because okay, the partner, the female survivor can make contact, you know, she can leave. But if you've got young children, they haven't really got a voice, and that's something that we don't project enough. So some of the impact on survivors, a lot of it's already been covered. An increase in the rate in intimate partner violence, which has happened in the UK, but also in Thailand, and we've seen a tremendous increase in the number of cases of British nationals that we get here in Thailand, an increase in the rate. Negative impact of living with the abuser for 24/7 during lockdown. Yeah, there is no escape. They're confined, particularly in Thailand. If we're looking at Thai nationals, with the breakdown of the tourist industry, the lack of tourism, people have lost jobs, and that added to the fact they're being confined in their homes because of lockdown. Education places aren't open, parks aren't open, and people are scared to go out because of the risk of COVID. So if you put all of those factors together, it creates that perfect storm situation, all these negative aspects combined. A lot of factors in our case is that COVID itself can be used as a tool of abuse as well. We've had cases where the male partner is threatened to cough, has been coughing on the survivor, is threatened to cause infection, etc. So it can be used as a tool itself, and something that's already been covered: access to services. A lot harder for our social services, for police to access victims. I know at the moment social services aren't doing any home visits at all because of risk of COVID. They're just not allowed. At the embassy, we're not allowed to travel at all within Thailand. I saw the hands up already. Am I out of time? Out of time already there?
Yes, I'm totally
Really?
sorry.
So quickly.
But you would like to take a few minutes for closing?
Okay, I'm quickly going to go through the main thing that I wanted to get to, which is the responses. Okay, so if we look at the responses to intimate partner violence, domestic violence in the UK compared to Thailand. Now, Thailand very much has this reliance on a reconciliation response, and we find that the police turn up and basically they try and keep the family together. And that's because the perception is, the social norm is, they don't want to get violent. We don't report domestic abuse. We keep it within the family. A very important consideration as well, if we look at the levels, the number of social workers. So, okay, it's all very well saying we need to have this response. In the UK, we have 108,000 social workers. In Thailand, we have 2,600 registered social workers. And the population is approximately the same. So I think something that Cheryl brought out there, having the skills or the will to tackle this problem. Well, have we got the skills? We haven't really got the level of social workers. Have we got the police that are trained to address this issue? Have we got the will to do it with the levels of social norms that are present within Thailand? Have we got the education? Are children at primary school age being taught in relationship education and the effects of domestic violence, what intimate partner violence is? So I think really that's my recommendation would be, let's start at the grassroots. Let's start with children. Let's start with addressing the social norms, and let's get the capacity of the Thai authorities up to speed, both in terms of training, but also the level of social workers that are needed to tackle these types of problems. Okay, I could have talked for hours on that, so thank you very much for the 10 minutes. I tried to pack in as much as I could. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Johnstone. And thank you all speakers. That's very knowledgeable session. I think that one thing that I found is that when all countries are locked down because of COVID-19, criminal justice response trying to adjust their work to remote service and technologies platform. And in time like this, women and children survivors of violence may face additional challenge, particularly on the issues of safety and confidentialities that come with the remote service and technology. For women migrant workers, they have to face more barriers and challenge to access to safe remote service and technology. As for this Safe and Fair program, have launched 2 series of technical briefs. One is on the remote service provisions for women migrant workers at risk or subject to violence, and the other one on the safe technologies for provisions of service to women migrant workers at risk or subject to violence, which hopefully will help guide the safe essential service provisions to women migrant workers in time of COVID-19. Today's session is very enlightening, very knowledgeable, and we learn a great deal from the distinguished speakers, the common challenge, and we are informed the promising innovations in different countries, while aware that there's still much need to be done for the improvement of the programs, policy, legislations and practice at national and international levels, as well as to promote the coordinated service and the international cooperations on ending violence against women, children, and migrants in the field of crime prevention and criminal justice. In the name of the organizer, I would like to thank all distinguished speakers and all participants who come from different places around the world to join this knowledge sharing session. We hope that everyone, our colleagues and families will stay safe and healthy during this difficult time. Thank you.